Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. Let us talk about quantum history, and I should firstly note that this is going to be sort of like an addition to my previous video, Stories of History, which was kind of a general agenda of mine with regards to history in the first place. But here, in this particular one, I wish to address an issue, I guess, of an interesting alternative perspective on the same points given in that video. And I should add that mostly those points are not really mine, but of, or at least the general perspective is not really developed by me, but by Russian thinker Sergei Pereslegin. I've already mentioned him in a couple of other videos, but anyway. And also I wish to note here that like in my video Boring World, I've described all those theories about how the whole world operates, etc., all these stupid theories about the world is a tetrahedron, etc. And on the surface you might say that this theory is also kind of a boring world type of a theory in my terminology, but I would say that it's not, because what I'm saying is I'm not giving you the truth, like how the things really are, but rather I'm just giving you a way of looking at the world, a way of looking at things, if you like, an aesthetic perspective on things. So it's not the truth, it's just a tool for you to, an alternative, let's say, tool to figure out what happens in history, what history is all about, and etc. Because otherwise, we only really have one picture of history, which is like classical, and here I would propose quantum version of it. So this is what we're talking about. And as much as classical physics is not really true and quantum physics is not really true also, this view of history is also not true. So it's not some absolute type of theory, you know, that's what I'm saying. Anyway, so let's jump into it. So firstly, I wish to give you a physical basis for this kind of thinking, I guess, which would be a description of double slit experiment. So again, I've had a presentation about quantum mechanics, and I'll give a link to it in the description with the proper timestamp on where I talk about double slit experiment, because there I talk about it in much more detail than I would here. So if you want more details, go there. Or read some textbooks or whatever. But here I'll just describe it in like really simplistically. So imagine we have a screen and a detector, like a source of particles, a screen and a detector, right? So particles go into the screen and then maybe pass or maybe not and fall into the detector where we find them, right? Detect them. So if a screen has one slit, it means that the particles would more or less move classically, like particles such as electrons or photons, for example. So we'll see more particles right against this slit in the screen, and less and less the farther we are going from the slit in a perpendicular direction, I mean. Okay, so that's pretty much described by classical mechanics. But if we have two slits in the screen and they're both open, what happens is if you shoot particles from your source to the screen with two slits, you see interference patterns. So a bunch of peaks and troughs on the detector. I mean, peaks and troughs meaning peaks meaning more particles detected, and troughs meaning less particles detected over time, at least, right? The statistics, basically. That's what we're talking about. So, and it even appears if you throw particles one by one. So each particle forms an interference pattern with itself, so to speak. So particle is a wave, blah, blah, blah. Wave-particle dualism and all things like that. But okay, so this is more or less an established fact, we might say. But Feynman went further, Richard Feynman, and he thought, well, okay, but what if we enhance this experiment further? Like, what if we have 3 slits? Well, then we would have an interference pattern from 3 slits, as if, again, the particle passed through all 3 simultaneously, okay? Okay, what if we extrapolate this further, like to 4 slits, or 5, or 6, or 7, etc.? Well, then we would see interference pattern on the detector, I mean, from 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever number of slits, okay? And what if we extrapolate this to an infinite number of slits? So basically no screen at all, because all the screen would be slits only, you know? So then we should also see the same interference pattern, but with infinite number of slits. So this is the thinking. And by the way, it kind of taps into this problem of continuum in mathematics because, well, it's a really serious problem. If you've ever studied mathematical analysis, you know that this NP equals P, I think it's called, problem, is kind of a serious problem because I might actually be confusing those things. But anyway, the problem of continuum is that even a smallest, infinitely small line, let's say, part of a line has infinitely many points, and that leads to many paradoxes. Again, I've already recommended Bolzano's book, Paradoxes of the Infinite, I think it's called. But anyway, where he describes all those things. But like, this is the problem, that a point doesn't have a size in mathematical sense, right? So how can you transition from something that has size, which is the screen, to a bunch of points which don't have size, right? So this kind of transition from points to the length of the screen is doubtful. And this is a flaw, I believe, in Feynman's thinking. I mean, he just assumed that if we have infinite number of points, there would be no pieces of screen anymore. But that's a kind of a comment on the side. But anyway, let's just proceed with Feynman's logic. That was kind of a meta comment on the Feynman formulation. So Feynman figured that, okay, if we have infinite number of points, infinite number of slits, then there would be no screen, right? And everything should proceed as usual with the same extrapolation. So we should have also an interference pattern as if there was a screen, but with infinite number of slits. This was his reasoning. And so how would we calculate the result? What we would detect with our detector is just summing all the trajectories, just as we did previously. So we assume that the particle moved through all the slits. So it moved, you know, in all the possible directions, even infinitely far away from this center line, like that and like that, etc. And we should sum it all up, all those trajectories, and we arrive at the correct result. And he is correct in this sense. Like, it really works. It's called Feynman path integral formulation of quantum mechanics. And yeah, it's really kind of a work of genius, I would say. All right, so the resulting path of the particle, whatever it is, follows from the summation of all these things. Well, with the proper weights, etc., etc., but it doesn't really matter in this sense. So it almost looks like a particle, when arriving at the detector, took all the possible paths at once, like simultaneously. And this interference of all these waves from all these paths together creates what we detect at our detector. This is basically the point. And well, you might say that it kind of resembles a statistical interpretation of quantum mechanics because, well, this is exactly what it says, that, well, it's kind of a tangent, but I have to note that it looks like our state vector, again, I refer to my presentation about quantum mechanics, is just a it just talks about the infinite ensemble of the same types of particles. So let's say we have a particle that is described by a certain state vector, and it corresponds to all of those paths simultaneously in this setup that we have. So it would make sense that we just statistically sum all those results and we get what we get. But okay, that's a separate topic anyway. So, and here I wish to kind of wrap up this example, this theoretical part, I guess, and return to my points about history, which I've pointed out in my video Stories of History, where I talked about that history is really constructed, and it's constructed in the present. And we ultimately, we ourselves, whoever we are, like persons or social institutions or governmental institutions or whatever, so we choose a trajectory from the past that we think is correct. But there are many trajectories from the past to the present that are possible, and ultimately, in this worldview, they are all correct. And like, this is the analogy with this Feynman path integral, is that the present is more or less singular, although it actually can be also deconstructed into a multitude. But we'll use a very naive first approximation, okay? Because again, it can be more complex, really, so to speak. So you can actually drive kind of a meta or post-quantum history where we'd have present represented by multitude. And it's really the case. This is really what's happening. But we'll say that the present is condensed into a point, and we'll say, well, okay, if we just naively bring this analogy forth, then the present state of things could have been achieved by an infinite number of ways from the past. And this is the analogy. So with the path integrals of Feynman, that the current state of things could have been achieved by an infinite number of past stories, histories, stories, etc. So this is what I'm talking about, and hopefully it's more or less understandable what I'm talking about, even though I'm not sure. Like, I apologize that this video is probably much more complex than any other on this channel, but hopefully you'll get at least some idea about what I'm talking about. All right. And okay, so naive view of history would have perhaps assumed that we actually have a single trajectory, but and even though we can acknowledge that the view of this particular trajectory or another is subjective, so it depends on your values, on your picture of the world and things like that. But anyway, naive mechanistic view would say that, following from that, I mean, what I've just said, this analogy with Feynman's path integrals, that, oh, it just means that history is probabilistic, you know, or something like that. Like, there was more probability that the true history is like that, but there was less probability that the history is more like that, etc., or like that, or even less probability that it was kind of like that, you know, through infinity or whatever, that then there was like infinitely close to zero kind of probability. But radical constructivists like myself would actually claim that all of those trajectories are equally viable, because, well, it's actually the case in quantum mechanics. I mean, mathematically they're not equally viable, but theoretically you may, like, if you have, let's say, a screen. Oh no, that would not be a screen. Okay, so we have a source of particles and a detector. The particle that you detect right against the source is not necessarily the particle that just went straight from the source to the detector. It might be the particle that went to almost infinity and went like that and fell there. Like, the probability is super small, like almost zero. But it is there. I mean, it might be that particle, and we have no way of knowing that. That's the problem. Or, well, not really a problem for my interpretation. It's actually a salvation of it, so to speak. But that's what I'm saying. Like, you're not sure what exact path this particle took. And in fact, again, quantum mechanics tells us that it's the particle that took all these paths simultaneously. So in some sense, all of those trajectories are equally viable, and you might kind of conclude from that they're equally irrelevant even, because well, firstly, in quantum mechanics there's no such thing as trajectory, so it's all imaginary in the first place. So yeah, and secondly, again, since it's the sum of all of that, it means that all of that matters, or none of that matters by the same token, you know, and nothing else matters, you know. Yeah. Or in even more radical terms, the past doesn't exist, you know. So all these trajectories don't really exist in some very fundamental yet still very abstract and vague sense. That's what I kind of wanted to say here. All right, but you can arrive at a different interpretation of quantum history. Like I've given you this Feynman path integral formulation, but you can arrive at a more quasi-classical, I guess, view when you have like perhaps infinitely many classical parallel histories. We just go like that. And what happens when some events proceed is, let's say, quantum leaps from one trajectory to the other, and they can, you know, proceed arbitrarily up and down. Of course, up and down are also arbitrary here. So it's all very abstract again, and I apologize for that. So yeah, and so we have like a bunch of parallel histories, but they are all classical in some sense, so they're all deterministic, yet we can jump from one to the other. That's the point. So that would also be in some sense quantum history, and actually it converges really well with this many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, where, well, let's say you have a Schrodinger's cat in a box, which is either alive or dead, or both alive and dead, and when you open the box, you see that the cat is either dead or alive. So, and this third state is actually deleted simultaneously. And again, see my video about quantum mechanics. There I like devote maybe half an hour to talking about this. But the thing is that you're like instantly teleported into one of two parallel universes. In one universe, the cat is alive when you open the box, and in the other, it's dead when you open the box. So again, it's kind of this quantum leap, right? And so we may assume that even in the past, such quantum leaps were possible. So your version of history, which kind of is deterministic, mechanistic, classical, which goes in a straight line, might not be correct, because in the past, such quantum leaps between those parallel versions of history were also possible. So this is the point. So this is, I guess, another view on the same, basically, problem, another interpretation of the same problem. Anyways, this is what I call quantum history, and what Pereslegin calls quantum history, even though, I mean, I formulate this in a completely different pattern than he does. He actually starts from completely other things and proceeds in weird ways, and I actually kind of detest the way he reasons, because even though he's always really fun to listen to, because he's full of interesting ideas basically, but unfortunately he is too reliant on systematics, and he is too reliant on science. He's not really skeptical about those things, and he kind of dogmatizes stuff, all this alternative stuff, too much, I believe. So I'm only kind of grabbing some pearls here and there from his talks. Anyway, so this is what we, I guess, me and him, call quantum history. Even though it's more or less my interpretation of it. So, yeah, so basically, yeah, this parallel history type of stuff is kind of quasi-classical. This is what I wanted to note. Whereas this path integral type of formulation is purely quantum. Even though parallel histories with quantum leaps is also kind of quantum, but it's formulated on the basis of the multitude of classical trajectories, fundamentally. All right, and so these are two possibilities for formulating quantum history, at least two. Maybe there are more, but I just don't, I'm not aware of them. And so we arrive at the picture of history in quantum history of that sort as we have a present, which is a point. Again, I've said this is only like a first approximation. In a second approximation, which would be more complex, you would have even the present represented as a multitude, you know. Like the detector doesn't really catch a particle at that point. It's actually not a point, but it's actually a lot of points, depending on the current interpretation of yours, whoever you are, of the current state of things. Because, well, it's a fact that different people, different entities, different power structures describe the present state of things differently. So it's also kind of a spectrum, you know. It's not a single point, but in this first approximation that we're going to use for the sake of this video, we have a single point here and now in the present. And from this, you have going into the past infinite number of trajectories. I shall still use this Feynman approach. So all those infinite trajectories kind of condensed into the present, and the sum of all of them produced the present, right? And the present is just a point, a knot of all these threads. And then in the future, we also have this infinitely expanding amount of possibilities, which is not really that contrary to the idea of a free will, for example. Again, future is unwritten, you know, this movie about Joe Strummer from The Clash. But anyway, so yeah, indeed, we know that the future is undetermined on some fundamental level, even though there are still those deterministic optimists, but I think they're just full of shit, to be honest. But anyway, this is the picture I'm talking about. So we have the present and a lot of threads in all directions from it towards the past or from the past into it, and a lot of threads just as well going into the future. This is what I'm talking about. And in the present, what we have is will, fundamentally, because again, in this picture, and it's a very important point, I believe, that will not only determines the future, which is kind of a basic picture of a free will since, I don't know, 16th, 17th century. Like, we can choose either this or that, and we go through that trajectory into the future or through that. It's kind of understandable, right? Again, free will. But the important point in quantum history, again, history is all about the past mostly, right? So the important point is that will not only defines the future, it also defines the past. So you choose not only the trajectory of your future, but simultaneously you choose the preferential trajectory from your past, or from our past, or from the past to the current moment. So we arrive at this picture where, again, all of that is interpretation, right? I interpret this future as better one than the other future, so I make a choice with my free will, and at the same time I interpret the past and I use the same will to choose that past rather than the other, depending on my interpretations. Like all the authority that was influencing me, my internal structures in my video, Inland Empire, all kinds of power ensembles around me and inside of me that shape my will fundamentally. So yeah, will chooses the correct trajectories, whereas again, without the will, I would even claim that they don't even exist in the first place, but that's a separate talk in the first place. So anyway, we arrive at this picture of Janus, the Roman god, which I've already talked about, and it's a sort of a comment, kind of an irrelevant one. I've talked about this in my two phases of scientific communication, where I've used this metaphor of Janus with two faces, like an old man, kind of wise old man looking into the past, and a young man looking into the future. So this is kind of a frequent depiction of Janus in Roman culture. So yeah, will is kind of a Janus of its own, and it kind of unites the past and the future, and it kind of chooses both trajectories simultaneously, sort of, kind of like that. And it's also obviously connected to Nietzschean concept, will to power, etc. I even myself, when I was like 18 years old, more like 20 years old or 19, I don't know, I wrote a song which was called Prophets of the Past, where I've emphasized that, you know, it's not only our future which is mutable, which changes, but it's actually our past which also changes. So we need prophets of the past. So not that we need them, it's just the fact that they are, you know, out there, who prophesize for different pasts, you know, different trajectories leading to this particular moment we're in. So yeah, that was the idea of the song. And there's also a kind of a joke in Russia, or maybe it comes from Soviet Union, I don't know, or maybe modern Russia, where it is said that a sociological survey showed that 40% of Russians are unsure of the, like, tomorrow, like 30% of Russians are unsure of today, and 30% of Russians are unsure of yesterday, kind of because they were drunk, basically. This is the idea. And Disco Elysium game, again, I should notice that it also has this idea that you wake up in this hotel, basically half naked or almost naked, and you don't remember your past, and the game kind of allows you to create your past, even though that's actually not true, because you are given your past afterwards, but only in vague details. So in some sense you can recreate yourself from this alcohol-induced amnesia, and it's kind of cool. So yeah, it's the same idea fundamentally, and it's really cool, I believe. So speaking about that, Pereslegin mentions three methods of kind of working with that, with this quantum alternative kind of histories. And he mentions, for example, dreams, which were again explored many times in, well, classical literature, like ancient tragedies and stuff, where, well, in dreams you can see almost like an alternative reality, and it kind of makes sense on its own, even though in our world it wouldn't make sense on our trajectory, so to speak. So it's one method of studying that. And by dreams, I'm not only talking about dreams, it may be some like drug-induced hallucinations, etc. It's also like, fundamentally, it's your mind producing something, so it kind of makes sense on some level, even though, like, you know, naively, mechanistically speaking, it doesn't, but really it does, you know, for you at least. So that's one point. And another point is art, obviously, and again, mostly fiction, like science fiction is a good way of exploring the alternative realities, alternative histories. Fantasy is the same thing, and etc., etc., and even paintings and music and things like that. All kinds of forms of art. And games, again. Disco Elysium is a really great alternative reality, I believe. The world is really rich there, like, seriously. It's a great world. Not a very fun one to be in, but it's very similar to our world in this respect. And again, games, that's another point. Even though Disco Elysium is also a game, this is not exactly what I'm talking about here, even though it also falls into this category. But I wish to note here that Pereslegin himself, for many years, he has conducted like geopolitical / strategic games with live people. So they've gathered in some room, let's say maybe 20 people or something like that, and they assign roles to various people, like you're gonna be representing Spain, let's say, you're gonna be representing Russia, and you're gonna be Australia, and we have this kind of situation, and they describe the situation. And what they are able to explore in this way is like really how would these entities behave in this alternative reality, or kind of working out some scenarios. And I'm pretty sure, I'm actually kind of completely sure that many, let's say, special agencies like CIA or whatever, NSA, you name it, Mossad, obviously, they play those games. Like it's one of the best tools of exploring what would happen if, let's say, right? So like those strategic games, geopolitical games is a really great tool. And like war games, there's actually a really great video by, oh damn, I have to make this intermission, I guess. I actually started this channel, maybe I already talked about this, I don't remember. I actually started this channel because I watched too much of the British blogger E.th.ph. And although he mostly focuses on war history, like ancient weapons and things like that, he also has a lot of rants about various stuff. So I watched him like for a year maybe, and I decided, well, I can do that too, something to that effect. So I was heavily inspired by him, and thanks for him. I actually sent him an email like a few weeks ago thanking him for inspiration. Anyway, so he has a video which I would also link in the description so you would see his channel. He's really a brilliant guy. So he talked about how the Britain fought the World War II, and they played war games literally. And the purpose was to destroy German submarines, basically, or at least to achieve superiority on the sea, because it was a big problem. German submarines really killed a lot of people, destroyed a lot of property. I mean, all these merchant ships that came from the US, let's say, to Europe, to Russia, to Murmansk, etc. Blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, so basically the point is that the British used war games, strategic games, even during World War II. So it's not a new development at all. Like, serious strategists have been doing that for decades at least, or maybe even centuries. I'm not even sure. I can easily imagine like some serious generals using something like that even in the 19th century, even in perhaps 18th century, I don't know. So again, 3 ways of exploring this alternative history type of quantumness are dreams, art, and games. Well, those are at least that Slegen mentions, and I haven't been able to found anything else. I think those are the main ones indeed. Alright, so we're coming closer to the conclusions, and I wish to make a meta comment here about this video itself. So we're kind of breaking the 4th wall here. So in this video, fundamentally, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to reinforce my own position on history, which I've described more or less in Stories of History video, using the already existing authority of quantum mechanics. So I'm saying, hey, quantum mechanics is accepted science, so there's a lot of power ensembles behind it. So let me also suck up to it, you know. Let me also draw some resources from quantum mechanics. And I'm saying, hey, my little pet theory also is, you know, compatible with quantum mechanics, so it should reinforce me, you know. This is what I'm doing fundamentally, even though you probably know my stance on science and how it evolves. So I'm not really considering quantum mechanics as fundamentally true. I'm just saying it's another interpretation of the world, and actually many interpretations, because quantum mechanics is not a single thing. It's a lot of different postulates, sub-theories, let's say, etc. But to be honest with you, I'm making this meta comment. What I'm doing factually is trying to draw political power from quantum mechanics. And again, see my video stories of not even stories, nature of knowledge, where I talk about how stories operate, how they try to form ensembles. So this is me trying to form ensemble with quantum mechanics, basically. Even though I kind of don't like it. Well, I kind of like it, but not really, something like that. And then we can have a post-meta comment, so to speak. So meta comment was kind of a breaking the fourth wall and coming to the meta level, kind of watching from the above what I've talked about previously. And now we're going even further, even another layer around that. We're getting some other onion, almost like I talked about in Onion of Aliens. Not really like that, but anyway. So hopefully you would have enough schizophrenic fuel to be able to walk all this, drive behind me through all of those tumbleweed. So anyway, post-meta comment would be that I'm using the meta comment where I've said honestly what I was doing with this political networks. So post-meta comment would be that I'm using my honesty in a meta comment to gain more political power as myself, as Eugene the philosopher. So you would see, you as a viewer, whoever watches this, you would see that, oh, this guy is honest, he acknowledges what he's doing and clearly states that, therefore I should believe him even more. So I would gain like exponentially more political points through that. Hopefully, probably not, but anyway. And you can layer upon layer, if you go deeper and deeper into schizophrenia, as I do. I'm not even sure why I'm still alive. I mean, I just imagine someone else being in my skin for a second and they'll probably kill themselves immediately. All right. And another comment not related to those I wish to make is that I kind of sucked initially with the whole idea of this video, because what I did was I've given you this Feynman's path integral as a metaphor for my own vision of history, right? Which is kind of a bad idea, because arguably my vision of history is much simpler than the whole formalism of quantum mechanics and Feynman path integrals. So it's like, explaining how, I don't know, how money flows with how the nuclear reactor works. It's kind of you're overcomplicating the situation rather than simplifying, which should be the aim of metaphor, right? Metaphor should be simple, to be well understood, easily understood, to explain more complex things. Whereas what I do is I take a complex thing and explain it with even more complex thing, so it's kind of an anti-metaphor in a way, or anti-analog or something like that. But anyway, so let's conclude this rant. So here in this video I talked about an alternative view of history fundamentally, and I believe it's more advanced by analogy of, quantum mechanics being more advanced than classical mechanics, than a simplistic deterministic view of history, right? So in a simplistic deterministic view of history, we have just a straight line where the past completely determines the future, and the present completely determines the future. And there's a single line, and there's an absolute truth because there's a single line, right? But of course, it's kind of in infinite dimensions, but it's still a line. That's what we're talking about. And yet, I believe that, okay, I kind of forgot, probably. I don't even remember what I was talking about in this video, but, well, I'll just reiterate it here. So, as we transitioned from simplistic, naive trajectories, like velocities and coordinates in classical mechanics, we should do the same for history, because history still sits on this deterministic classical mechanics type of view of the world, and it's already incorrect, and it's like obvious for anyone. So, yeah. So, to completely conclude this, I believe that as well as we currently have a vision that the word future kind of means multiplicity of possibilities. Like, again, your will determines of where you're going. And I'm not talking about the issue of the free will. It's kind of there. Like, again, Nietzsche said, if you feel that if you know, damn, how did it go? Well, basically, you should know that your will is not free, but if you feel, if you know, if you feel your will is unfree, you're stupid. No, if you know your will is free, you're stupid. But if you feel your will is unfree, you're mad, basically, something like that. Hopefully, you get the idea through this tinted glass of my stupid reproduction. But anyway, so I'm not talking about free will. Anyway, so let's conclude. So I propose, just like we have kind of a vision that the future is a multiplicity of possibilities, by the same token, we should acknowledge that the past is also a multitude of possible interpretations of what happened, right? This is what I'm talking about. So I propose, as a kind of a quasi-slogan for quantum history, if you wish to formulate it in one sentence, it would be something like, we have many pasts, plural, and not a single past, as was in classical history. So classical, old deterministic history is the past, whereas quantum history is many pasts. And that's more or less sums up the idea. I probably forgot something, but anyway, it's really getting too long, and hopefully you get the idea. Yeah. Okay, thank you for watching. The eons are closing.